الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون وسواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكرى وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم. إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين. واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم 2 فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب أليم قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون أتخذوا من دونه آلهة إن يردني الرحمن بضر لا تغن عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين وما أنزلنا على قومه من بعده من جند من السماء وما كنا منزلين إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون يا حسرة على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون ألم يروا كم أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون وإن كل لما جميع لدينا محضرون وآية لهم الأرض الميتة وأحييناها والأرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وأعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون ليأكلوا من ثمره وما عملته أيديهم أفلا يشكرون سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض ومن أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون وآية لهم الليل نسلخ منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى عاد كالعرجون القديم لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون وآية لهم أنا حملنا ذريتهم في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون وإن نشأ نغرقهم فلا صريخ لهم ولا هم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاعا إلى حين وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون وما تأتيهم من آية من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين وإذا قيل لهم انفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا أنطعم من لو يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون ونفخ في الصور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مرقدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون إن أصحاب الجنة اليوم في شغل فاكهون هم وأزواجهم في ظلال على الأرائك متكئون لهم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون سلام قولا من رب رحيم وامتازوا اليوم أيها المجرمون ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم ألا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وأن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم ولقد أضل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تعقلون هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون ولو نشاء لطمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنى يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسخناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مضيا ولا يرجعون ومن نعمره ننكسه في الخلق أفلا يعقلون وما علمناه الشعر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويحق القول على الكافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقنا لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون وذللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند محضرون فلا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم يرى الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسيا خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد رحم الله من قرأ الفاتحة
اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وجل فرجهم اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجا وسهل مخرجا اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجا وسهل مخرجا بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم كن لوليك كالحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا حافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنه أرزك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا. اللهم اجعلنا من أنصاره وأعوانه وشيعته ومشتاقه ولا تجعلنا من أعدائه. صلى الله على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا علي يا عظيم يا غفور يا رحيم. أنت رب العظيم الذي ليس كمثله شيء وهو السميع البصير. وهذا شهر عظمته وكرمته وشرفته وفضلته على الشهور. وهو الشهر الذي فرست صيامه علي. وهو شهر رمضان الذي أنزلت فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان. وجعلت فيه ليلة القدر وجعلتها خيرا من ألف شهر. فيا ذا المن ولا يمن عليك من علي بفكاك ركبتي من النار في من تمن علي وأدخلني الجنة برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. صلى على محمد وعلى محمد وجه فرجهم. اللهم رب شهر رمضان الذي أنزلت فيه القرآن وافترضت على عبادك فيه الصيام. صل على محمد وآل محمد وارزقني حج بيتك الحرام في عام هذا وفي كل عام واغفر لي تلك الذنوب العظام فإنه لا يغفرها غيرك يا أرحم يا رحمن يا الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أفتتح الثناء بحمدك وأنت مسدد للصواب بمنك وأيقنت أنك أنت أرحم الراحمين في موضع العفو والرحمة وأشد المعاقبين في موضع النكال والنقمة وعظم المتجبرين في موضع الكبرياء والعظمة. اللهم أذنت لي في دعائك ومسألتك فاسمع يا سميع مدحتي وأجب يا رحيم دعوتي وأكل يا غفور أثرتي. فكم يا إلهي من كربة قد فرجتها وهموم قد كشفتها وأثرة قد أكلتها ورحمة قد نشرتها وهلكة بلاء قد فككتها. الحمد لله الذي لم يتخذ صاحبة ولا ولدا ولم يكن له شريك في الملك ولم يكن له ولي من الذل وكبره تكبيرا. الحمد لله بجميع محامد كلها على جميع نعم كلها. الحمد لله الذي لا مضاد له في ملكه ولا منازع له في أمره. الحمد لله الذي لا شريك له في خلقه ولا شبيه له في عظمته. الحمد لله الفاش في الخلق أمره وحمده الظاهر بالكرم مجده الباسط بالجود يداي الذي لا تنقص خزائنه ولا تزيد كثرة العطاء إلا جودا وكرما إنه هو العزيز الوهاب. اللهم إني أسألك قليلا من كثير مع حاجتي به إليه عظيما وغناك عنه قديم وهو عندي كثير وهو عليك سهل يسير. اللهم إنا عفوك عن ذنبي وتجاوزك عن خطيئتي وصفحك عن ظلمي وسترك على كبيه عملي وحلمك عن كثير جرمي عندما كان من خطايا وعمدي أطمعني في أن أسألك ما لا أستوجبه منك الذي رزقتني من رحمتك وأريتني من قدرتك وعرفتني من إجابتك فصرت أدعوك آمنا وأسألك مستعنسا لا خائفا ولا وجلا مضلا عليك فيما كثرت فيه إليك فإن أبت عني أتبت بجهلي عليك ولعل الذي أبت عني هو خير الله وخير لي لعلمك بعاقبة الأمور. فلم أر مولا كريما أصبرا على عبد الله منك علي. يا رب يا رب يا رب إنك تدعوني فأولي آن وتتحبب إلي فأتبغض إليك وتتودد إلي فلا أقبل منك كأنه لي يتطول عليك فلم يمنعك ذلك من الرحمة لي والإحسان إلي والتفضل على بجودك وكرمك فارحم عبدك الجاهل وجد عليه بفضلك إحسانك إنك جواد كريم. الحمد لله مالك الملك مجري الفلك مسخر الرياح فالق الإصباح ديان الدين رب العالمين. الحمد لله على علمه بعد علمه والحمد لله على عفوه بعد قدرته والحمد لله على طول أناة في غضبه وهو قادر على ما يريد. الحمد لله خالق الخلق باسط الرزق فالق الأسباب ذي الجلال والإكرام والفضل والإنعام الذي بعد فلا يرى وقرب فشاهد النجوى تبارك وتعالى. الحمد لله الذي ليس له منازع يعادله ولا شبيه يشاكله ولا زهير يعازده قهر بعزة العزة وتواضع لعظمة العظماء فبلغ بقدرته ما يشاء. الحمد لله الذي يجيبني حين أنادي ويستر على كل عورة وأنا عاصي ويعظم النعمة على فلا أجازي فكم من موهبة هنية قد أعطاني وعزيمة مخوفة قد كفاني وبهجة مونكة قد أراني فأثني إليه حامدا واذكره مسبحا الحمد لله الذي لا يهتك حجابا ولا يغلق بابا ولا يرد السائل ولا يخيب عامل الحمد لله الذي يؤمن الخائفين وينجي الصالحين ويرفع المستضعفين ويزع المستكبرين ويهلك ملوكا ويستخلف آخرين والحمد لله قاسم الجبارين مبير الظالمين مدرك الهاربين نكال الظالمين صريخ المستصرخين موضع حاجة الطالبين معتمد المؤمنين الحمد لله الذي من خشيته ترعد السماء وسكانها وترجف الأرض وأمارها وتموج البحار ومن يسبح في غمراتها الحمد لله الذي هدانا هذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله الحمد لله الذي يخلق ولم يخلق ويرزق ولا يرزق ويطعم ولا يطعم ويميت الأحياء ويحيي الموتى وهو حي لا يموت بيده الخير وهو على كل شيء قدير صلوات اللهم صل على محمد عبدك ورسولك وأمينك وصفيك وحبيبك وخيرتك من خلقك وحافظ سرك ومبلغ رسالاتك أفضل وأحسن وأجمل وأكمل وأزكى وأنمى وأطيب وأطهر وأثنى وأكثر ما صليت وباركت وترحمت وتحننت وسلمت على أحد من عبادك وأنبيائك ورسلك وصفوتك وأهل الكرامة عليك من خلقك اللهم وصل على علي أمير المؤمنين ووصي رسول رب العالمين عبدك ووليك وأخي رسولك وحجتك على خلقك وآياتك الكبرى والنبأ العظيم وصل على الصديقة الطاهرة فاطمة سيدة نساء العالمين وصل على سبتي الرحمة وإمامي الهدى الحسن والحسين سيد شباب أهل الجنة وصل على أئمة المسلمين علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والخلفاء الحادي المهدي حججك على عبادك وأمنائك في بلادك صلوات كثيرة دائمة اللهم صل على ولي الأمر. اللهم صل على ولي أمرك القائم المؤمل والعدل المنتظر وهفه بملائكة المقربين وأيده بروح القدس يا رب العالمين. اللهم اجعله الداعي إلى كتابك والقائم بدينك. استخلفه في الأرض كما استخلفت الذين من قبله. مكن له دينه الذي ارتزيته له. أبدله من بعد خوفه أمنا يعبدك لا شريك بك شيء. اللهم أعزه وعزز به وانصره وانتصر به وانصره نصرا عزيزا وافتح له فتحا يسيرا واجعل له من لدنك سلطانا نصيرا. اللهم أظهر به دينك وسنة نبيك حتى لا يستخف بشيء من الحق مخافة أحد من الخلق. اللهم إنا نرغب إليك في دولة كريمة تعز بها الإسلام وأهله وتذل بها النفاق وأهله وتجعلنا فيها من الدعاة إلى طاعتك والقادة إلى سبيلك وترزقنا بها كرامة الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم ما عرفتنا من الحق فحملناه وما كسرنا عنه فبلغناه. اللهم المم به شعثنا واشعب به صدعنا وارتك به فتكنا وكسر به كلتنا وعزز به ذلتنا وأغن به عائلنا واقض به عن مغرمنا واجبر به فقرنا وسد به خلتنا ويسر به أسرنا وبيز به وجوهنا وفك به يسرنا وأنجه به طالبتنا وأنجز به مواعيدنا واستجب 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 به دعوتنا وآتنا به سؤلنا وبلغنا به من الدنيا والآخرة أمالنا وآتنا به فوق رغبتنا يا خير المسؤولين وأوسع المعطين. اشف به صدورنا وأذهب به غيظ قلوبنا واهدنا به لما اختلف فيه من الحق بإذنك إنك تهدي من تشاء على صراط مستقيم. وانصرنا به على عدوك وعدونا إلى الحق آمين. اللهم إنا نشكو إليك فقد نبينا صلواتك عليه وآله وغيبة ولينا وكسرة عدونا وكلة عددنا وشدة الفتن بنا وتظاهر الزمان علينا. فصل على محمد وآل صالح وإن على ذلك بفضل منك تؤجله وبزر تكشفه ونصرا تعزه والسلطان حق تظهره ورحمة منك تجللنا وعافية منك تلبسنا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. بار دیگر صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم برحمتك في الصالحين فأدخلنا في إليين فارفعنا وبقاسم من معين من عين سلسبيل فاسكنه ومن الحور العين برحمتك فزوجنا ومن الولدان المخلدين كأنهم لؤلؤ مكنون فأخدمنا ومن ثمار الجنة والهموم الطير فأطعمنا ومن ثياب السندس والحرير والاستبرق فألبسنا وليلة القدر وحج بيتك الحرام وقتلا في سبيلك ووفق لنا وصالح الدعاء والمسألة فاستجب لنا وإذ جمعت الأولين والآخرين يوم القيامة فارحمنا وبراءة من النار فاكتب لنا وفي جهنم فلا تغلنا وفي عذابك وحوانك فلا تبتلنا ومن الزكوم والزريع فلا تطعمنا ومع الشياطين فلا تجعلنا وفي النار على وجوهنا فلا تكببنا ومن ثياب النار وسرابيل الكتران فلا تلبسنا ومن كل سوء يا لا إله إلا أنت بحق لا إله إلا أنت فبهنا. اللهم أنت اجعل فيما تقضي وتقدر من الأمر المحتوم في أمر الحكيم من القضاء الذي لا يرد ولا يبدل أن تكتبني من حجاج بيتك الحرام المبرور حجهم المشكور سعيهم المغفور ذنوبهم المكفر عن سيئاتهم وأن تجعل فيما تقضي وتقدر أن تطيل عمري في خير وعافية وتوسع في رزقي وتجعلني ممن تنتصر به لدينك ولا تستبدل بغيري. أعوذ بالله أعوذ بجلال وجهك الكريم أن ينقضي عن شهر رمضان أو يطلع الفجر من الليلة هذه ولك ولك قبلي تبعة أو ذنب تعذبني عليه. صلى على محمد وآل محمد. بار دیگر صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل فرجهم. اللهم الآن قتلة أمير المؤمنين يا ذا الذي كان قبل كل شيء ثم خلق كل شيء ثم يبقى ويفنى كل شيء يا ذا الذي ليس كمثله شيء ويا ذا الذي ليس في السماوات العلى ولا في الأرضين السفلى ولا فوقهن ولا تحتهن ولا بينهن إله يعبد غيره لك الحمد حمدا لا يقوى على إحصاه إلا أنت فصل على محمد وآل محمد صلوات لا يقوى على إحصائه إلا صلى الله على محمد وعلى محمد جي. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم إنك قلت في كتابك المنزل شهر رمضان الذي أنزل فيه القرآن هدى للناس وبينات من الهدى والفرقان وعزمت حرمة شهر رمضان بما أنزلت فيه من القرآن وخصصته بليلة القدر وجعلته خيرا من ألف شهر اللهم وهذا أيام شهر رمضان قد انقضت ولياليه قد تسرمت وقد صرت يا إلهي منه إلى ما أنت أعلم به مني وأحصى لعدده من الخلق أجمعين فأسألك بما سألك به ملائكتك المقربون وأنبياؤك المرسلون وعبادك الصالحون أن نصلي على محمد وآل محمد وأن تفك ركبتي من النار وتدخلني الجنة برحمتك وأن تتفضل علي بعفوك وكرمك وتتقبل تقربي وتستجيب دعائي وتمن علي بالأمن يوم الخوف من كل هول عددته ليوم قيامة إلهي وأعوذ بوجهك الكريم وبجلالك العظيم أن ينقضي أيام شهر رمضان ولياله ولك قبلة تبعة أو ذنب تؤخذني به أو خطيئة تريد أن تقتفها مني لم تغفرها لي سيدي أسألك يا لا إله إلا أنت إذ لا إله إلا أنت إن كنت رزيت عني في هذا الشهر فاردد عني رضاء وإن لم تكن رزيت عني فمن الآن فارز عني يا أرحم الراحمين يا الله يا أحد يا صمد يا من لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد يا ملين الحديد لداود عليه السلام يا كاشف الزر والكرب قرب العظام عن أيوب عليه السلام أي مفرجا هم يعقوب عليه السلام أي منفس غم يوسف عليه السلام صل على محمد وآل محمد كما أنت أهله أن تصلي عليهم أجمعين وافعل بما أنت أهله ولا تفعل بما أنا أهله يا ملين الحديد لداود عليه السلام يا كاشف الزر والكرب العظام عن أيوب عليه السلام أي مفرج هم يعقوب عليه السلام أي منفس غم يوسف عليه السلام صل على محمد وآل محمد كما أنت أهله أن تصلي عليه أجمعين وافعل بما أنت أهله ولا تفعل بما أنا أهله. One more time. يا ملين الحديد لداود عليه السلام يا كاشف الزر والكرب العظام عن أيوب عليه السلام أي مفرج هم يعقوب عليه السلام أي منفس غم يوسف عليه السلام صل على محمد وآل محمد كما أنت أهله أن تصلي عليهم أجمعين وافعل بما أنت أهله ولا تفعل بما أنا أهله. يا فالق الإصباح وجاعل الليل سكنا والشمس والقمر حسبانا يا عزيز يا عليم يا ذا المن والطول والقوة والحول والفضل والإنعام والجلال والإكرام يا الله يا رحمن يا الله يا فرد يا وتر يا الله يا ظاهر يا باطن يا حي لا إله إلا أنت لك الأسماء الحسنى والأمثال العليا والكبرياء والأعلى والآلاء أسألك أن تصلي على محمد وآل محمد وأن تجعل اسمي في هذه الليلة في سعدي وروح مع الشهداء وإحسان في إليين وإساءتي مغفورة وأن تهب لي يقينا تباشر به قلبي وإيمانا يذهب الشك عني ورزي بما قسمت لي وآتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار الحريق وارزقني فيها ذكرك وشكرك ورغبة إليك والأنابة والتوبة والتوفيق لما وفقت له محمد وآل محمد صلواتك عليه وعليهم. إلهي 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 وكفى السائلون ببابك ولا زال الفقراء بجنابك وكفت سفينة المساكين على ساحل بحر وجودك وكرمك يرجون الجواز إلى ساحة رحمتك. إلهي إن كنت لا تغفر في هذا الشهر الشريف إلا لمن أخلص لك في صيامه وقيامه فمن للمذنب المكسر إذا غرق في بحر ذنوبه وأثامه. إلهي إن كنت لا ترحم إلا المتعين فمن للعاصين وإن كنت لا تقبل إلا من العاملين فمن للمكسرين. إلهي ربح الصائمون وفاز القائمون ونجي المخلصون ونحن عبيدك المذنبون فارحمنا برحمتك وأتقنا من النار بعفوك يا كريم يا أرحم الراحمين وصل على محمد وصل على محمد وآله الطاهرين. اللهم أدخل على أهل القبور السرور. اللهم أغن كل فقير. اللهم أشبع كل جائع. اللهم اكس كل أريان. اللهم اقض دين كل مدين. اللهم فرج عن كل مكروب. اللهم رد كل غريب. اللهم فك كل أسير. اللهم أصلح كل فاسد من أمور المسلمين. اللهم اشف كل مريض. اللهم سد فقرنا بغناك. اللهم غير سوء حالنا بحسن حالك. اللهم اقض عنا الدين وأغننا من الفقر إنك على كل شيء قدير. صلوات اللهم صل على محمد وعلى محمد وعجل فرجهم.
إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. سبحان الله والحمد لله ولا إله إلا الله والله أكبر ولله الحمد. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله. أشهد أن عليا ولي الله. أشهد أن عليا حجة الله. حي على الصلاة. حي على الصلاة. حي على الفلاح. حي على الفلاح. حي على خير العمل. حي على خير العمل. الله أكبر الله أكبر. لا إله إلا الله. لا إله إلا الله. صلى اللهم على سيدنا ونبينا محمد وآله الطاهرين.
استغفر الله. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الله أكبر الله أكبر. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول الله. أشهد أن محمد رسول
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
محمد وآل محمد صلوات. أفضل الصلاة والسلام عليك يا رسول الله محمد وآل محمد صلوات. صلوا على علی کا نام بھی نام خدا راحت جاں ہے. علی کا نام بھی نام حرز طفلا ہے. علی کا نام بھی نام خدا تیغ جوان ہے. لیا نام علی تو بلا سب تلی. فرش اعظم پہ لکھا ہے نام علی. بڑے مشکل تو کہہ دو مدد یا علی. رہے ورد زباں شیعہ ناد علی. بڑے مشکل تو کہہ دو مدد یا علی کے نام سے دونوں جہاں میں عزت ہے. علی کا ذکر ہے خالق کی اطاعت ہے. علی کے نام سے غمگین دل کو فرحت ہے. کرو حق سے دعا تو بنا میں علی. ہوگی حاجت روا تو بنا میں علی. بڑے مشکل تو کہہ دو مدد یا علی. رہے ورد زباں شیعہ ناد علی. بڑے مشکل تو کہہ دو مدد یا الہی. واسطہ تجھ کو محمد مصطفیٰ کا. الہی واسطہ تجھ کو علی مرتضیٰ کا. الہی واسطہ حسنین کا فاطمہ کا. رہے ایمان ہمارے سلامت سدا. مومنوں کو نہ ہو کوئی رنج و بلا. بڑے مشکل تو کہہ دو مدد یا علی. رہے ورد زباں شیعہ ناد علی. بڑے مشکل تو کہہ دو مدد. علی کے نام سے ہو مستجاب سب کی دعا. جو کہے بیمار مومن دے انہیں جلدی شفا. قید آفت میں جو ہے یا رب انہیں کر دے رہا. تیری ذات ہے پاک خفی و جلی. ہو قبول ہماری مراد دلی. بڑے مشکل تو کہہ دو मदद याली रहे वेदे ज़बां शियाना दे अली पड़े मुश्किल तो कह दो मदद याली रहे वेदे ज़बां शियाना दे अली अफ़ज़लुस सलात मुहम्मदिन व आले मुहम्मद। Inshallah, few words in munajat in honor of Ramadhan alayhi salam. Wa Muhammad wa ali Muhammad salawat. दुआएं मांग रहा हूँ खुदा असर दे दुआएं मांग रहा हूँ खुदा असर दे दुआएं मांग रहा हूँ खुदा असर दे दे मैं चांद ज़हरा का देखूं मुझे नजर दे अलम उठाता हूँ अब्बास का मेरे मालिक अलम उठाता हूँ अब्बास का मेरे मालिक झुके न आगे किसी के मुझे वो सर दे सुना है नूर सा चेहरा है मेरे आका का सुना है नूर सा चेहरा है मेरे आका का निगाह मेरी है बेनूर तू नजर दे आखिरी का है जुल्म जोर ज़माने में अल अजल मौला है जुल्म जोर ज़माने में अल अजल मौला अब इंतजार है मुश्किल खुदा जिगर दे मैं चांद ज़हरा का देखूं मुझे नजर दे और खुशनुदी इमाम ज़माना बआवाज़े बुलंद सलवात
Let's all recite 5 times I am Yujibu for all those in need of du'as. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء 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 اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. سورة المباركة الفاتحة. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فوض أمري إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ونعم المولى ونعم النصير. والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. اللهم صل على محمد. وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد، قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل لا أسألكم عليه أجرا إلا المودة في القربى. صدق الله العلي العظيم. زينوا مجالسكم بالصلوات على محمد وآل محمد. السلام. My respected elders, brothers and sisters in Iman here in Allentown or across the globe, wherever you're hearing my voice, Salamun alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Question: who was Miqdad ibn Amr? We've been discussing, prior to our commemoration of the Nights of Amir al-Mu'mineen, we had begun a series on the companions of the Holy Prophet. And with that, we began discussing those individuals who we, as the followers of Ahlul Bayt, we hold in the highest esteem and the highest respect and the highest regard. That is, those individuals who are the true companions of Rasulullah. And we mentioned the likes of Salman al-Farsi or Salman al-Muhammadi. And then we mentioned the likes of Abu Dhar al-Ghafari. These are people who are illustrious personalities who we have the most respect for. These are also individuals who, if anyone were to ask, we would say, who is our role model? After Allah, after Allah's Messenger, after the Prophets, who are at a certain standard which we call Isma or Ma'soom. It's not that they are robots, but they have controlled their nafs to an extent where they do not sin. Below them are the likes of these individuals who are role models. After the 14 infallibles, after the Prophets, these role models, these companions are of the highest position we should reflect on and study their lives. The same way that people, for example, in our world, if you want to be successful in business or you want to be successful in sports, you often study the lives of the people who came before you. I remember when I was in Los Angeles at that time, Kobe Bryant had passed away, the athlete, the basketball player. And he had learned from his predecessors. And at that point in time, he had learned from Michael Jordan. Like Michael Jordan had learned from the people who come before him. So whether it's in sports or other domains, whether it's in business, you'll find the likes of the many entrepreneurs will study the lives of entrepreneurs who were successful before them. It's something for you and I to reflect on in terms of understanding what it is that I need to learn in order to be successful. I'll give you the example of Michael Jordan. And this is a very, very important element of Islamic spirituality that's taught, that I'm giving this example to you from. And you can apply this to whatever sport you want. Michael Jordan, it's well known, and Kobe Bryant learned this from him. He used to do this. He used to watch film of himself playing. That is, after he finished the game, he would watch a videotape. Now maybe they use CDs. Now maybe they use digital online recordings. They don't need these things anymore. So they'll watch the tape of the film of how they played. And you may say, why are you watching yourself play? Is that a bit arrogant? What's wrong with you? And if you ask Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant, they will tell you that I'm not watching it I'm not watching it to see how well I played. I'm actually watching it for something else. I'm watching it to see what mistake I made. I'm watching it to see what pass I missed. I'm watching it to see what shot I missed. I'm watching it to see what mistake did I make so next time I can correct it. In Islam, we have this concept of muraqabah and muhasabah of the nafs. That is, at every moment in time to reflect at the end of the day, what did I do good at the end of this day, for example? And then, is my nafs, where's the training of my nafs? What mistake did I make that I can correct at the end of the day? And constantly trying to fix this aspect. These companions were experts in this as well. Therefore, when we come to the life of these individuals, tonight we will look at the life of someone by the name of Miqdad. Miqdad is someone who you may find people in our communities have this name, some of our elders, some of our youth, but oftentimes Miqdad as a personality is not really looked at in terms of why is he such an important personality and what lessons can we learn from the life of Miqdad. Tonight, therefore, in the brief moments that we have together, I want to look at a few things. Number one, what is the importance of this companion Miqdad as stated by the Ahlul Bayt? What is his pivotal role in Islam? Number one. Number two, what is his story? Where did he come from? Where did he go to? And what lessons can we learn from that in our own lives? At the third level, is it that this companion maybe had some challenges or some negative traits, and eventually that same negative trait was turned positive through the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt, through the teachings of Rasulullah, and how can that give us guidance in our world? At the fourth level, what is it about the marriage of Miqdad and what can we learn about that in terms of our society and our world at large? And finally, what was the life of Miqdad after this holy prophet and during the life of Imam Ali, and what lessons can we learn from that life as well? This is our agenda for tonight. Wherever you are in Allentown or across the globe, from the bottom of your heart, send a salawat on Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. At the first level, with respect to how important is Miqdad, now Miqdad is this individual who, according to the narrations from the Holy Prophet that are attributed to him, that Allah's Messenger has stated in numerous traditions about the fadail and the fadila of this individual, that is by the name of Miqdad ibn Amr or Miqdad ibn Aswad. We'll explain why he has both names that are stated in terms of that in a moment. This individual, with respect to the narrations, it is stated that Allah's Messenger says, Allah has commanded me to love four people. Allah has commanded me to love Ali and Salman and Abu Dhar and Miqdad. And in some other narrations, Ammar's name has been mentioned as well. So Allah has commanded the messenger to love these four individuals. So that it gives us a moment of pause to reflect that why is Allah especially mentioning this individual? Furthermore, another tradition that Jannah is longing for four people, four individuals. Imagine you and I, the world is trying to get to Jannah, the world is trying to get to paradise. But when it comes to this individual, according to the narration, Jannah itself, paradise itself is longing for four people. Who are these four people? That is Ali, that is Salman, that is Abu Dhar, and that is Miqdad. In fact, the narrations go further. Miqdad is one of those few people who was allowed to attend the funeral procession of Fatima al-Zahra. As you know, Lady Fatima, she had said that I do not want anyone to come to my funeral, my janazah, especially the ones that she was upset with. And very few select individuals were permitted to attend. Miqdad was one of those people. He's also considered a part of the Shurtat al-Khamis. Shurtat al-Khamis, that is the elite guard that supported Imam Ali alayhi salam after the Holy Prophet. This person is someone who he has merit after merit that is attributed to him. Number one. Number two, what is his story? Where did he come from? His father's name was Amr. His biological father's name was Amr. Therefore, he's known as Miqdad ibn Amr. But later he was known by another name as well. Miqdad, his father was from the Hijaz area. Now, oftentimes I mention Hijaz. Hijaz is like the modern Saudi Arabia's. It's Mecca Medina region towards the western bank. Now, I say Saudi Arabia today because that's how many people don't know Hijaz is the name or of that particular area. I'm saying it out of, unfortunately, having the circumstances. Anyways, you understand what I'm saying. So at that point in time, he's from this region and he had a temper, according to the traditions. He had an anger problem, which was very common and which is still, unfortunately, very common. At that point in time, he had this problem. And so he had beat someone to the point he had ultimately killed this person. When he had killed this person, he had to flee because if the other tribe finds out, they're going to kill him, of course. So he had to flee. So he left from Hijaz and he came towards what we now call Yemen, the Yemeni region. Now, if you know the history, in Yemen were the Himyarite Arabs. The Himyarite Arabs are considered pure. There's a few branches of Arabs. There are Arabs who became Arabized, and there are Arabs who are considered themselves pure. In Yemen, you would find people who are Ahlul Kitab, the people who are Christians, for example. You would find even Jews, and you would find people. Idolatry was not as common in Yemen at that time, and you would find these people. So he fled there. When he came to Yemen, there was a tribe that sort of adopted him and accepted him as his own. This is about Miqdad's father we're talking about. Eventually, when Miqdad himself was born 37 years before Rasulullah announced his prophethood, so he's about 3 years younger than Rasulullah. When Miqdad is born, at that point in time, according to the narration, when he comes forward, he eventually, as he was growing up, he started thinking, well, I'm not originally from here. I'm originally from up north. What is my tribe, my original family like, my original tribe like, my original people like? I want to go meet them. You know how sometimes when someone's adopted in society today, they have their adopted parents, but they want to think to themselves, what are my biological parents like? You've heard of Steve Jobs? I'm sure you've heard of Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs, for example, his biological father was Syrian. He was from Levant. And so he didn't spend his life with his father, but he always wanted to meet his father. And he eventually found out where his father was, and he was in Silicon Valley, and he found out that his father owned a restaurant in Los Angeles, in the Los Angeles region. And he actually went to the restaurant to see his father. But he didn't speak to his father. He just sat there, ate, and then left. In fact, his father, when he meets him, he says that, eventually, years later, he would say, even Steve Jobs comes to my restaurant. But this idea that people want to know, where do I biologically come from? Where do I originally come from? At that time, Miqdad had the same idea. I want to know where I come from. So what circumstance happened was, Miqdad also got this temper. It seemed that he inherited this temper from his father. When he got this temper, he also killed someone in Yemen now. And eventually he had to flee. When he had to flee, he eventually went back. By the way, I'm going to clarify this statement. If you have inherited, for example, a trait, does not mean you have to stay with the trait. And I'll make that clear in a moment. He eventually went from Yemen, he went back to what we now call the Hijaz region. Now, when he came there, he needed to have someone who is his guarantor, his guardian. Because if you're living in that area in the barren desert, you need to have a guardian. If you don't have a guardian, they can kill you and you don't have anyone to support you. It's a tribal system. So the person who gave him amnesty and gave him a sanctuary and was his guardian was by the name of Aswad. That's why when he came to Hijaz, he became known as Miqdad ibn Aswad, because no one knew his original father, Amr. Later on in Islam, the rulings came that when someone has a child, you always have to respect their biological parents and keep that name. But at that time, it was not the rule and the norm. So they called him Miqdad ibn Aswad, and he was living in this territory. His adopted father, his guardian, was someone who was very renowned and known in society. But here, subhanAllah, the way of Allah is very mysterious and wise as well. It's something of wisdom to really reflect on. This Aswad is one of the 5 people who used to be the biggest enemies of Rasulullah. And it's stated in the Quran. That is, this individual, Allah's way is that He has Musa rise up in the house of Fir'aun. Fir'aun, the biggest enemy of Allah, Musa is rising in his house. Similarly, one of the greatest companions of Rasulullah, Miqdad, is growing up in the house of an individual like Aswad. Eventually, Miqdad, when he was in the Hijaz region, he would go to Mecca. In Mecca, he would go and meet Rasulullah, and eventually he adopted and accepted Islam. When he adopted and accepted Islam, he had to keep this in hiding. He couldn't tell anyone. If he tells anyone, they'll kill him. So he's staying in Mecca in the house of Aswad. When he's staying in Mecca in the house of Aswad, the Muslims eventually are growing, and eventually they do the migration. When they do the migration from Mecca towards Medina, they go to Medina. When they go to Medina at that point in time, Miqdad can't go with them, because if he goes, then they'll know that he's joined Islam. So he was always thinking, how can I get there? How can I get to Medina? How can I join Rasulullah? At that point in time, after they moved, the migration, as you know, many Muslims, the Muhajirun, when they left Mecca and they went towards Medina, they left their belongings, they left their things in Mecca. When they left it, now the idolaters and the people of Quraysh were the enemy of Rasulullah. They did not have the honesty and integrity of Rasulullah. Meaning, when Rasulullah left from Mecca towards Medina, he told Ali ibn Abi Talib, he said, Ya Ali, there is property and trust that people have left with me. Make sure you return it to them and then you come to Medina. But the other side was not so gracious as Rasulullah. So they had taken the property of the Muslims who had left from Mecca towards Medina. Eventually they came to Rasulullah and said, Ya Rasulullah, look, when we left Mecca, the Muslims said, we left Mecca and we came to Medina. When we came to Medina, we didn't have anything. We left everything in Mecca. And the people who were the Quraysh, they stole our property, they took it. Said, yes. He said, Ya Rasulullah, we have found out that there are trade caravans that go from Syria down to Yemen. That was the trade route. You know, the Silk Road that used to connect? This was the regional Silk Road, if you can call it, in that territory. So from Syria to Yemen. And of course, Syria at that time was not today's Syria. Syria was the Levant, the Grand Levant, in the sense of Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, and Palestine of the modern day. Anyways, they were coming down. They said, Ya Rasulullah, we know that the Quraysh have their caravans that are coming and they have our property there. Do we have the right to take their caravans and take our property back? He said, if it's your property, then you have the right. So they organized a group under the leadership of Hamza alayhi salam, the first group. Hamza, the uncle of Rasulullah. At that point in time, when they went, they ambushed one of the caravans and they tried to take it over. They were not successful the first time. Eventually, they made a second movement to try to ambush and take over one of the caravans. This caravan belonged to Abu Sufyan. When this news reached, Miqdad saw this as an opportunity. The caravan has not come back to Mecca. The news reaches Mecca, Miqdad is in Mecca, that the Madinite Muslims have come and they have tried to take over this caravan and they're trying to take back their property. Miqdad heard the news and the other people of Mecca heard the news. Many people gathered and they said that we will go and protect the property of Abu Sufyan. Because the idea was if we protect Abu Sufyan's property today, tomorrow he'll protect our property. So they said, we'll go protect. Miqdad saw this opportunity. He said that the Madini Muslims are there, the Muslims who have come from Medina, they are there. And now I can use this opportunity. I can go to this caravan, act like I am supporting Abu Sufyan. That's how I'll go. But when I get there, I'll deflect and I will join the Muslims and I can go back with Rasulullah. He did this. He went and then he said, I'm going to support Abu Sufyan's caravan and his group. Eventually, then he saw the Muslims and the Muslims knew he was already Muslim, but they knew his circumstances. So they accepted, he deflected and he went back with the Muslims and he went back towards Medina and he joined Rasulullah. When he joined Rasulullah in Medina in the early days, Islam was still building up. The Muslims used to live 10 people in one room at that time. And at that time, the room in which Miqdad lived was the room where Rasulullah was staying. So he got the proximity of Rasulullah and he was able to learn from Rasulullah the different teachings of Islam directly. And eventually, this individual was someone who had a very, very strong conviction. How? In the Battle of Badr, which is the first battle of the Muslim empire, at that point in time, the Muslim religion, that you know that when the Battle of Badr happened, on this side there were 313 Muslims, and on the other side there were almost 1,000 of the non-Muslims, the opposition on the other side. And at that point in time, the 313 number that we're told is also the number of generals that will be in the army of the Imam of our time. At that time, according to the narrations, there were on the side of the opposition, there were many horsemen. On the side of the oppositions, there were many people who were having horses or cavalry and weaponry and all of the things. They were much more facilitated and they had much more resources on the other side. But on the Muslim side, there was not as much. And on the Muslim side, the one person, according to historians, from our side, and some say maybe there were two, but what is for sure is the one horseman that was on the side of the Muslims who had a horse was actually Miqdad, this individual. His horse was known as the horse that floats. In this state, Miqdad was there. There was a moment in time where the Muslims became afraid and they said, there's too many people on the other side. What are we going to do? At that point in time, Miqdad stood up and he said to Rasulullah, he says to the Prophet, he said, Ya Rasulullah, we will not be like those of Banu Israel who told their prophets that you go fight in the way of your Lord and we'll stay here. At that point in time, he said, Ya Rasulullah, we will support you and we will fight with you. When he said this, the other Muslims began to get some courage and they said, we will also fight. And later, many years later, people came forward and said, Ya Rasulullah, and we wish we had the courage to tell you what Miqdad told you on the day of Badr, that he said that we will not abandon you. And Rasulullah also, the narration says, he began to smile, that he noticed that the conviction that he had been teaching had been seeping into the hearts of the believers through the words of Miqdad. First principle. Second principle that we come to is how Rasulullah laid the foundation of change within Miqdad. Now Miqdad, as I mentioned, he had this element, a principle. One of the questions that comes forward here is it nature or nurture? What matters more in life? This is an age-old question. That is it the family that I'm born into, my genetics that create who I am, or is it my environment and how I'm raised that has an impact? And it's an interesting thing to look at. We look at what Miqdad ibn Amr, that is his biological father, had one impact, and also the guardian who was Aswad, who was looking after him, also there was an impact there. Study. during the Korean War that happened, the American Korean War that happened, there was a study that was conducted. Today, you cannot do these studies because of there are regulations that are much more strict. At that time, you could. What was it? It was a study that was a double-blind study that looked at both sides, and what it had was it had parents who had their children. Many of these children were adopted by American parents in America. Korean children who were adopted by American parents in America after the Korean War. And what happened was the researchers wanted to see what is more likely, what has a bigger impact in terms of the child going to college. Is it the biological parents or is it the parents that are the adopting parents? Who has a bigger impact? They found that if the adopting parent had actually gone to college, the percentage chance probability increase of the child going to college increased by about 20%, just over 20%. Substantial, it's quite a good number. But when they compared this to the rate at which if the biological parent in Korea had gone to college, and what was the impact of this on the child in America going to college eventually, they found the number jumped up to over 70%. So what they concluded was both of them matter, but what matters more perhaps is the genetical component, the genetic element. I say this because if you connect this to what I mentioned a couple of nights ago about what's happening in the field of epigenetics, and these are issues that are very important for us to tackle as communities. Why? Because I told you, our youth and our young ones, and not only that, even the people in our communities who are not even what we call youth. In Islam, youth is 40 or under. It's quite liberal. But beyond that, when you're going to college, when you're going to university, when you're doing research and you're doing these things for work every single day, you cannot keep these questions compartmentalized in your heart and mind. These are going to come up. And you're going to ask what are the answers to them. So for example, you may find there's a genetic element to the equation, but that genetic element may get activated or it may not be activated based on this idea of what child experiences that person had. So for example, if God forbid a child has beaten, for example, if God forbid a child sees that their mother is being beaten or there's violence in the household, this can have an impact on the child. I remember I was on my flight to the West Coast when I was going for majalises. Before you go from Florida to California, you have 5 hours, you can watch a bunch of documentaries. When you go 2 ways, you get 10 hours. I watched a bunch of them. There's one I recommend you watch, it's called Crazy Not Insane. It was looking at how in someone's life, someone can know something is wrong. However, their impact on actually acting or not acting on that is still reduced. That is, they can know something's wrong and still commit something wrong. This is something that's very complicated for us to understand because we cannot fathom this. But if you ask psychiatrists, if you ask psychologists, they'll tell you we've known this for quite some time. The psychiatrist who was leading the study, because I don't want to leave this open-ended, the psychiatrist who was leading the study, she started her career in juvenile delinquency centers with children. And she noticed what were those children who had committed violent crimes, hurting or killing someone. She wanted to know what was any commonality between them. She said she noticed every single one of those children who committed violent crimes, they themselves had been the victim of violent crimes themselves as a child. So we sometimes say, oh, someone killed someone, someone hurt someone. Yes, that person should be separated from society to protect society, no doubt. But do we stop and think about what has that child maybe gone through in order to lead to that? We need to stop and really pause and reflect on these questions in terms of our world and our society. So when it comes to the question of nature and nurture, both of them matter. But you may find that there's two people. This is why I mentioned on the issue of drugs that I mentioned a few nights ago. Many people, and I've seen this in my travels, and it breaks my heart. Some people actually, there may be two people sitting next to each other. One of them uses some form of drugs. They never touch it again. The other one becomes addicted and hooked on it for life. And they're both sitting next to each other because the genetic makeup of both of them is entirely different. I'm saying this because I know of stories and cases in our communities globally where some people in our communities, out of amusement, they told one of their friends, why don't you just use this substance? And when they themselves used it, it had no impact on them. But when their friend, quote unquote friend, used it, it ruined their life to the extent that some of them went to the graves. I say this because in our communities we have to have these sobering conversations. I'm not sugarcoating anything here for you because I really care. My heart bleeds for our community everywhere. Any human being who suffers, it bleeds. Vice News, if you know Vice media outlet, they did a special in their media reports on the opioid epidemic in America. Do you know what city they picked? Dearborn, Michigan. Because every other week a family is burying their children and nobody has the courage or the audacity to speak out. And my heart bleeds for those parents who are having to bury their children and they cannot vent about what's going on because they feel such a pressure societally of shame. When you have lost a child, you have already been dealt the biggest blow. You've already been dealt the biggest card. And on top of that, we don't create a space to give people comfort. We're supposed to be followers of the Ahlul Bayt. What's going on here? My dear brothers and sisters, people are suffering. When we talk about mental health and we talk about substance abuse, many times they go hand in hand. And what I'm saying is, I'm not inviting anyone to use substances illicitly. What I'm saying is, sometimes when the person is using the substances, as a community and community leadership, that may be a cry for help. We need to try to encourage and save our youth. I'm seeing this go happening coast to coast, close and globally. This is a lesson for you and I. Nonetheless, coming back to Miqdad. Miqdad, in that situation, when he makes the migration, he lives with Rasulullah. Rasulullah tells him a lesson and teaches something. It's a lesson for you and I to learn from. What is that? That is this. He has a conversation. He would go to battles with Rasulullah and the Muslims. When he would go to battle with Rasulullah and the Muslims, this is how Rasulullah changed the dynamics of his biology. He said, Ya Rasulullah, if I'm in the heat of battle, Miqdad says to Rasulullah, he says, Ya Rasulullah, if I'm in the heat of battle and I'm fighting someone and he cuts my finger off, cuts my fingers off. And then after that, I overpower him and then I corner him and he runs behind a tree. He's giving him a scenario. Because he knows that Islamic laws and war are very strict. You cannot unjustly kill anyone just like that. You cannot destroy economic infrastructure. You cannot destroy or burn trees or economic infrastructure. You cannot destroy or demoralize the enemy. You can't do that. So, Ya Rasulullah, what if he cuts off my fingers, he runs behind a tree, and he says to me, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammad Rasulullah. He says the kalima and he accepts Islam. Ya Rasulullah, you know, I know, that's not sincere. He's just protecting himself. He's saving his life. How should I accept this from him? He says, Miqdad, you need to have mercy on him. You need to accept him. Now one may say, what is the meaning of this? What's the purpose of this? Now that doesn't mean that you don't protect yourself and make sure that that person does not ambush you and trick you. The same way Imam Ali, when someone would disrobe themselves in the heat of battle, he'd go away from them. But Amir al-Mu'min could have killed them off very easily. But there's a concept of dignity here. Anyways, at that point in time, Miqdad understood. What he may not have understood at that time, which became known later, was Rasulullah, who is known as Rahmatan lil Alameen, wa ma arsalnaka illa rahmatan lil Alameen. The Quran says, we have not sent you except but a mercy unto mankind, or not mankind, the Alameen, the universe. Rasulullah had planted a seed of mercy in the heart of Miqdad. Why? Some years later, when there was another battle at that point in time, when another battle ensued, they got a POW, a prisoner of war. And I told you before, I tell those people who say Rasulullah was a warmonger, Rasulullah was this, Rasulullah was that, I tell them that did you not read when when a POW would come to the Muslim side, Rasulullah said, either you can become a Muslim and you are free, or you can teach 10 Muslims how to read and write, or some art, or some craft, or some science, and you're free. And nonetheless, they brought this person. Before they took him to Rasulullah, he came to some of the companions that caught him. Miqdad was there, and the second Khalifa was there. Umar was there, and some other people. They said, become Muslim, accept Islam. He said, no. Perhaps they asked him, do you know some trade or some skill or something? Maybe you can teach someone. He said, no. They said, become Muslim, become Muslim. At that point in time, the second Khalifa, according to this, before he became the second Khalifa, he drew his sword. He also had a big anger problem, as you know, historically. Again, this is historical facts. Because we often say this, I'm against polemics and I'm against the Shia Sunni divide. I believe in what Ayatollah Sistani has said, that the Ahl Sunnah are our nafs. But that does not mean, and he has not said, nor has anyone said, that you are to compromise your belief system. That is, I can respond to our brothers in Ahl Sunnah in terms of from their own books, in terms of answering their questions. But I am not supposed to take my aqidah from their books. My aqidah will come from my books. Otherwise, what ends up happening is I become Sunni. What's the difference? I need to make sure it's well documented that this same second Khalifa, not my words, he was a domestic abuser. He had beat his sister before he beat anyone else. Even afterwards, he struck the own family of Abu Bakr after Abu Bakr had died when they were crying. There's a historical fact. And of course, he struck, as you know, he attacked the house of Fatima al-Zahra. It's very important to know these things, not to divide, but to say that these issues were there and Rasulullah came to try to eradicate these issues. He drew his sword and he was about to kill this person, the second Khalifa. Miqdad, who himself had a anger problem, stopped him. He said, hold on a second, relax. Rasulullah said, have mercy. Don't always try to kill people right away. Have mercy. Let's take him to Rasulullah. Principle. You and I, we have anger. We have issues that happen. There are two systems in our brain. I invite you to read a book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Dr. Daniel Kahneman. He's a Nobel laureate who won the Nobel Prize in Economics, and he's a psychologist. Although he's a psychologist, he won the Nobel Prize in Economics at Princeton University, which may not be so far from here. Dr. Daniel Kahneman says we have two systems in our brain, System 1 and System 2. System 1 is the small ancient brain. It is the one that's very fast. It's the flight or fight response. System 2 is this prefrontal cortex. That is the more logical center of the brain. Now, System 2 is slower, but it does the more complicated things that allows us to do engineering and mathematics and sciences. But System 1 is also necessary for our survival. Anger has to do with the emotional brain, System 1, which is the fast-acting one. Whenever you get angry, realize System 1 has hijacked your System 2, your logical center of your brain, and just delay for a few seconds. Count to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Take a deep breath, 2 deep breaths. It will help you. Delay. Don't always react. Realize the mind may have been hijacked. When they brought this person to Rasulullah, he said, Ya Rasulullah, this person is not accepting Islam. Rasulullah started logically discussing with him and say, accept this. You know, at this point, do you believe this? Do you? He started talking to him. He then understood at that point in time, and eventually he accepted Islam to the point that he eventually fought in one of the battles and died as a shaheed. The principle of mercy and patience of Rasulullah. Final things that I'm concluding with, and inshallah we'll call it a day. What happened? Eventually this same individual, he got to a point, Baghdad, where time was progressing and he wanted to get married. When he wanted to get married, an individual said to him, Abdurrahman ibn Auf, if you know that after the second Khalifa, there was a Shu'ara council in which Abdurrahman ibn Auf was given veto power. This individual comes to Miqdad and said, Miqdad, why don't you get married? Miqdad was almost 50 years old. He hadn't been married yet. So Miqdad, why don't you get married? He said, you're right, it's a good idea. Miqdad was honest, similar to Abu Dhar. He said, you're right, I should get married. He said, can I marry your daughter? He got really upset. He didn't like that. He said that, well, you know my caste, you know my tribe, you know our position and prestige, and you're asking for my daughter's hand? He said, no way. He went to Rasulullah. You see that discrimination element still exists. By the way, you sometimes think that we don't have discrimination in our communities. Believe me, we do. We have not only racism, we have something called colorism. You know colorism? This wanting to be fairer skinned. A lot of this comes from the remnants of the colonization that happened by colonizers from Europe. I was in India, they are selling this product called Fair and Lonely or something like this, that you're trying to lighten your skin with. That this idea that people are not satisfied, even our communities, when it comes to marriage, what's the skin tone color? La ilaha illallah. Rasulullah was trying to eradicate this centuries ago, and we're still stuck in this type of dilemma of racism and colorism and discrimination of forms. Rasulullah said, don't worry, these people, forget about them. Don't worry about them. I will make the arrangement. You can marry, for example, Du'ba. Maybe you can marry. I'll speak about this. Du'ba was the daughter of Zubair ibn Abdul Muttalib. Zubair, Abdullah, and Abu Talib. These three brothers had the same mother, these individuals. Zubair came from that line. At that point in time, Du'ba. Du'ba eventually married Miqdad, and they got married and they had their family. Eventually, and finally I'm concluding here, this individual was one of those individuals that after Rasulullah left this world, when the first Khalifa was appointed, not appointed as you know, at the Saqif of Banu Sa'ada, they congregated. When they congregated, there was no consensus. When there was no consensus, who would become the second Khalifa drew his sword, and he says that you all must pledge allegiance to the first Khalifa, that is Abu Bakr, who will become at that point. It was a forced vote, if you will. Nonetheless, this is why Plato was against democracy. Because he said democracy everywhere is mob rule. This is exactly what happened at Saqifa. If you want to know why Plato was against the democracy that we have. Nonetheless, this happened. When this happened, 40 people came to the door of Imam Ali. When 40 people came to the door of Imam Ali alayhi salam, they said, Ya Ali, rise up and we will support you. Amir al-Mu'mineen gave a statement which we often don't mention. He said, oh my comrades, 40 of them. He said, very well, you'll support me? Tomorrow, I want you all to come back here and have your heads shaved. He said, very well. The next day, only 3 people showed up with their heads shaved. They say either 3 or 4. It was the likes of Salman, Abu Dhar, Miqdad, as well as Ammar bin Yasir. Nobody else came. But when we say, Imam, 12th Imam, come, we will support you. Will I even shave my head for my Imam? Question. There was a poet that I was reading his works. He said that if Karbala happened today, there would be no more than 72 people. That is, you have 8 billion people now in our world. And still, a question that you and I must ask, what are we doing? Where are we? At that time, look at the status and the situation that Imam Ali had to deal with. This was the likes of a companion such as Miqdad. The sincerity, the honesty. This is why the narration says the final thing. 10th level of Iman is Salman. Salman al-Farsi. Do you know discrimination? I just mentioned colorism. They used to call him Farsi because this was a derogatory term. It was to make fun of him because Fars was considered negative in the eyes of the locals there. Because they had divided the world to Arab and Ajam. Ajam meaning someone who's mute, who couldn't speak. Arab were the ones who could speak. That is their language. They had that pride in it. They used to derogatorily make fun of Salman and call him Farsi. And Rasulullah said, no, 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 he's minna ahlul bayt. When the issue of Muhajirin Ansar came, the Muhajirin wanted him, the Ansar wanted him. He said, no, he's Salman minna ahlul bayt. Anyways, this individual, Salman, 10th level of Iman. Abadar, 9th level. Miqdad, 8th level. Ammar is on the 7th level. This is the status of Miqdad. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to learn from the life of Miqdad bin Amr or Miqdad bin Aswad. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to inculcate the ability to change our temperament based on the teachings of Miqdad in our lives. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow us to give rise to train, to nurture everyone the same way Rasulullah nurtured Miqdad. Allow us to nurture the youth of our community. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to alleviate the suffering of all those who are suffering, either through their health or wealth or otherwise. Alleviate their suffering, Ya Allah, tonight. And Ya Allah, hasten the reappearance of Imam Sahib al Zaman and allow us to be amongst his companions when he returns. A final request to please recite the Surah Al-Fatiha for the sponsors, Marhumin, for your Marhumin, for our Marhumin, for the Marhumin of all those who served before, during, and after the program, as well as for all of those who do not have someone to recite the Fatiha for them in this night. Surah Al-Mubarak Al-Fatiha ma'as salawat. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط
زيارة. السلام عليك يا رسول الله. السلام عليك يا أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء. السلام عليك يا خديجة الكبرى. السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله الحسين وعلى 9 المعصومين من ذريتك علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والحجة بن الحسن عجل الله فرجه وساق الله مخرج ودهوره. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.